It's my pleasure to introduce the San Francisco-based installation artist and photographer Thomas Jackson. Many of his works were shot in the North Bay, where I went to high school and studied ecological restoration. And it was through my fascination with guerrilla art that I discovered his familiar and yet refreshingly poignant series, Emergent Behavior. In this celebrated series, Thomas Jackson explores the seemingly choreographed behavior of self-organizing emergent systems through his uncanny use of solo cups, cheese balls, and the like. His works comment on our socially constructed views of nature, bringing to question our ability to coexist with our environment through his juxtaposition of the natural and manufactured, the built and unbuilt, and the real and imaginary. In addition to nationwide exhibitions, Thomas has been featured in Harper's Magazine, The New Yorker, Wired, and Tricycle Magazine. So please, on behalf of Hopes 24, join me in welcoming Thomas Jackson.
Am I on now? Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And thanks to everyone, all the organizers of Hopes. It's really a wonderful invitation. I'm excited to talk about myself for 45 minutes, which I don't usually get to do. But so I was going to start with some older work that is relevant because it sort of established some of the themes that I sort of settled on with the emergent behavior work. It started probably a little over 10 years ago when I still had a real job. I worked at a magazine in New York, and I was getting a little bored, so I started taking pictures. And I started out just doing landscapes and street photography, and then I was, for a short while, I was obsessed with office parks. So I was going around New Jersey and taking pictures of like glass cubes in manicured settings. And then one day I had a notion, and a lot of my work starts more with a notion than an idea. And I had the notion of just making a robot out of whatever materials I could find lying around, and sort of put him into various situations. And so at the time I had a little house up in the Catskills, about 2 hours north of New York City, and this is where he existed. And I made him out of a bunch of junk I bought at a steel salvage place in Kingston, New York. And his head is a recessed lighting fixture. His feet are the housings from surveillance cameras. The sort of the front plate is like parts from a VCR or something. And his hands are those like super clamps that photographers and photo grip type people use. And it started out as sort of a series of sort of humorous, almost kind of New Yorker cartoon kind of situations. And it started to evolve into pictures of work. And I'm not sure to what extent these are self-portraits in terms of what I was feeling about my job at the time or stuff like that. But it went from work, and then it started being about working in nature, and specifically controlling nature. And so it became more and more about this robot being in this wild sort of woodsy setting and trying to keep nature at bay, and feeling the pain as he did that. I used to chop a lot of wood up there, and I miss it. Here he is doing some self-care, I think. This can be interpreted in a number of ways. I leave that up to you. And so once I'd established this sort of fighting against nature narrative, I decided something more needed to happen. There needed to perhaps be some sort of backlash against this character's actions or perhaps overreach. So stuff starts to happen. And this is when I start sort of getting into making installations. And as you'll pretty easily be able to tell, there's a lot of these are not, some of them are not live installations in the sense that that wasn't all there. There was some manipulation involved in that, but that's something that I'll talk more at length at in a little while. That is not a real baby, not to worry. And so I sort of started doing these sort of found object sculptures out of sticks and leaves and things that I would find lying around in the woods. And they became gradually more and more elaborate, as you can see. This was just leaves and some sort of wire armatures, and I think I had strobes inside of those things. You can see a sign that the robot was recently at this in the foreground, but decided to depart. Then I started getting really into, like I went to the fireworks store in Pennsylvania and really stocked up and got a lot of smoke bombs and Roman candles and stuff. And I sort of built this sort of wood cairn around a fluorescent light. And this is when these things started to become very performative in that I always did these alone, but there were a lot of parts to getting the picture done. So I would have to light these smoke bombs, drop them into this thing, and then run back and take the picture, and hope that everything came together at the very moment that I was able to take the picture. More fluorescent tubes, which I love. I need to get back to those. That thing is actually made out of the old TV antenna that was on top of the house that I climbed up and took off because it wasn't being used anymore. More fluorescent tubes and white pine branches. The birdhouse is a recurring motif, as you can see. That's my car. And I just put a smoke bomb on a chair next to the car and lit it and ran back and hoped for the best. So things are starting to unravel here. And now I guess it's all very interpretable, but he's decided to intervene. In whatever's going on, he's intervening. And this one was actually one of these really big firecrackers that you have to put in like a mortar tube. And I tied it to a string between two trees, lit it, opened the shutter of the camera, and ran. And then came back when it was over. Some bad stuff's happening now. And again, like for this one, I set him up, and then I opened the shutter of the camera, ran back and stood on a ladder and shot Roman candles at him. And then ran back and closed the shutter. Yeah, it doesn't end well. This is actually modeled after a famous classical sculpture called the Dying Gaul. He has the same pose as this statue. My niece, when she saw this, referred to this picture as the robot's funeral. But so in the end, it sort of became this sort of parable about, the perils of intervening with nature or fighting it too hard or something like that. And so I decided I needed to have a book. And so I made this handmade objet out of, the wood is from a falling down chicken coop that was in the woods on this property. And I wanted it to be something that was sort of his world. And so it has an antenna on top. It actually has a switch and a light that flashes on top. Here's another view. The spine is piano hinges. And here are a few views of the interior. And I set out to make like 20 of these, I think, but I flamed out at about 7 because it was too much. I also did a bunch of drawings that were sort of intended as his sketchbook of observations of whatever was going on there. The inside is pretty heavy gauge steel plates. They weighed about 10 pounds. Oh wait, I messed up. Yeah, here's a little video of the book. And the soundtrack is peepers, which are really prevalent at this place in upstate New York in the springtime. Here's the antenna, which you need to use to make the pictures sharper. And you get the idea. So I did that, and I had a really hard time finding my way out of that project. And it was like the Al Pacino saying they tried to get out and they pulled him back in to the mob. So I tried to stop it, but I kept going back and making more robot pictures. And I made a series of pictures in which I killed him over and over again that were modeled after saints. Like I did a Saint Erasmus where his guts were being pulled out, and one where he was shot full of arrows and all that stuff. And I actually wanted to do a series of altarpieces of the robot, but finally I managed to get my way out of it. And so I started, and I did this. And this is sort of the beginning of emergent behavior. And again, it was a notion at the beginning, and that was to find a location and to see what was basically on the ground and pick up whatever was there, make a sculpture out of it, and photograph it. So this was shot in Brooklyn in Red Hook, and scattered across the sidewalk were these shards of broken shipping pallets, those things that forklifts pick up. And I picked up a whole bunch of them and went back to my studio and lashed them together with zip ties, and then returned to this location at like 4 in the morning or something and shot this thing. And again, in terms of how this one is created, there is some manipulation because the sculpture I made was not that big. It was basically about this big. So I shot it there, and then I moved it and shot it there, and moved it and shot it there, and moved it, shot it there, and then stitched it all together digitally. So then I took this concept and moved it to a natural setting. And this is where the robot's location. And I went around in the woods with a machete and hacked off all these maple and oak leaves and attached them to a big piece of wire mesh that was suspended between 2 trees. And that was, sort of a revelation, that one. But something wasn't still clicking for me, but I spent a lot of time looking at these 2 images, trying to figure out what I was doing or what they were, and it suddenly dawned on me, the obvious, that they were sort of swarms. They were like, biological forms, flocking birds or shoaling fish or whatever. And once I figured that out, I had my sort of inspiration that I could mine almost endlessly. And so I started looking at a lot of stuff like this, and like this, and like this. And the thing, one of the many things I love about swarms is, to me, they are a really apt representation of our contradictory feelings about nature. They're incredibly beautiful and almost spiritual, yet they're kind of menacing and scary. They just sort of encapsulate a lot of those feelings. So the thing that I felt wasn't quite working, though, was using objects from the ground. And one thing I realized that if I was going to pick up objects off the ground, I was going to run out of options really fast. Like in the woods, I could only pick up sticks and leaves. And in the city, I could only pick up, Coke cans and cigarette butts and stuff like that. And so I decided I needed to go shopping, basically. And so I started hanging out at the party store and Staples and places like that. And so this was one of the first ones that I did that was cups number 1. And then Post-it notes from, these are Staples brand Post-it notes, which I'll tell you are not nearly as good as Post-it brand, 3M, the real Post-it notes. Because these actually, the glue really works. And the colors are nicer too. They're like these strong neon colors, where these are sort of these, not as nice. But I also like that, these objects are sort of iconic. Each one has its own personality, and it has its own sort of set of associations, both for me, but I think sort of for everyone. For me, a lot of them have somewhat negative connotations because, Post-it notes they represent sort of fear of disorganization for me. They represent sort of a Dilbert sort of life of, corporate, gray cubicles and, Post-its stuck to computer monitors and stuff like that. But I know to some people adore Post-it notes and they think that they're wonderful. But that all the better, because it means that, everyone has a different association with these things, and to take them out of that context, whatever it is, and put them in a place where they absolutely don't belong, interesting things happen. And they sort of take on new meaning and new associations. This is shot in Pennsylvania, the other one in New Jersey. And this is glow sticks, which I had a lot of misgivings about using because there isn't really much that's negative about glow sticks. They're just like a happy thing that kids love. But I found them irresistible just as a material to work with because they light themselves, for one thing. And they're sort of reminiscent of natural things in the natural world, like bioluminescent fish or stuff like that. Again, this one involved some digital manipulation because basically I set this thing up. It was held up by a stand that I then removed in Photoshop. And at some point along the way, someone said to me, wouldn't it be cool if these things were in camera? And a light bulb went off in a big way there. And so I set out at that point to try to do that. And the great thing about that is it opened up a whole new sort of set of possibilities and a whole new set of avenues that I could explore conceptually. And also in terms of how people view these images. Because, as you know, we're flooded with imagery today, not only in advertising, but in the art world as well. That's, you don't always know what you're looking at. And that's totally fine, but it's gotten to the point where you can show something like this to a child, and they'll be like, oh, that's fake. Because everyone is sort of jaded. Everyone's learned that you shouldn't really trust what you're looking at. And so, to me, that was a challenge. Like if I could make things that looked like they were digitally manipulated but weren't, that would be some real mischievous fun. And it would also sort of perhaps be, thought-provoking in terms of how we digest and consume images. But this is the cheese balls, and cheese balls are really a wonderful material to work with because they'll pretty much crunch onto anything. Like I could just go up and just like stick them to that bark, and they would just go and just sit right in there. And there's a wire armature. You can just see the little pieces of wire in there, and they would just stick right on there. I had to wear gloves because you know that stuff gets under your fingernails and like stains your skin for days. And I swear I did not eat one in the whole process of making this because I knew I wouldn't stop if I did, of course. And I also made extra sure to pick them all up when I was done because I knew that if the wildlife got a taste, they'd never go back. But they were great. Yarn. This one was sort of an experiment, and it sort of falls out of the animal sort of biomorphic theme a little bit. But the point of that is that every material is different, and part of the fun of making this work is figuring out what every material is capable of, and what its sort of character is, and how you can manipulate it. And yarn loves to take on these angular geometric forms, as it does in this case as well. This one's shot in my in-laws' yard in Pennsylvania. Marshmallows. A lot of times I'll do multiple images of, as you saw with the yarn and the Post-its, of a material. And some people have said you should only do one because it's sort of like you've already delivered the punchline or something. But I feel like each material has more potential than I'm able to take advantage of in each opportunity. So, if I'm really interested in something, I'll keep going with it. But I did another marshmallows that was a bomb, but I might have to go back. And this is the first of, speaking of materials that I love, this is the first of many plates images. And this was also shot in upstate New York. And as I was telling some people yesterday, my daughter, who was then probably like 4 years old or 5 years old or something, helped me with this because the house was like right here, so she came out and helped me. And so she put a lot of plates in this area, and there's just strings going back and forth, and you just tape these things to the strings. But the problem with her efforts was that she basically made this all pink because she was only interested in pink plates. And I kind of regret today that I changed it. I should have left the pink ones there because, part of the fun with these things is that they're sort of thought experiments in that you look at them and there's something you don't understand and you just try to think of an explanation for it. And I'm sure that, you would come up with a reason for that in terms of the behavioral, behaviors of plates. So here's a little, there she is. This is another glow sticks piece that I was constructing in the studio in Brooklyn, and then taking to a location in upstate New York. And so during all this time, as I said, I was looking at a lot of pictures of swarms and so forth. Sometimes I tried to be very sort of specific about that. And for this piece, I actually was thinking about gnats and midges. When you're in the summertime in the backyard, the little swarm of bugs, and there's sort of like a cluster in the middle, and then others that are on the margins swooping through. And I did a little research, and I learned that basically what's going on there is that the males are in the middle, and the females are the ones on the outside swooping through, looking for mates, and they'll swoop through, and if they find one, they'll take them out or something. And so I basically had that in mind when I made this piece. And here's a little video. Is it going? A lot of my videos are quite crude. I'm getting better, but the problem with and this is me like stumbling through the forest, like it's. I don't think I actually fall down, But I want to focus more on video, but the problem with that is if I focus too much on video, then I'll take my focus away from the actual installation and the photograph. And then it'll be, that's the priority. Wait, what did I do? Oh, here's another sort of stop motion of the construction of one that was made from garden hoses. And I tend to like to buy materials that are very cheap, but these were like some designer garden hoses from West Elm. It was like $250, which, I really wanted them, so I just decided to make an exception this time. It's slowly taking shape. This gives you an idea of how long these things, or just the length of time makes. Basically, usually I start, 10 in the morning or something, and then take the photograph at dusk, and then break it down in the dark. Which means that if I do them in the winter time, it's a real mad process, whereas in the summer it can stretch out, especially up here. I could be out there till 9:30 at night probably. So this is plates number 3, I think, because even though you saw plates number 1 before, plates number 2 was a failure. So this is, and an interesting thing about the video versus photograph thing though, is that, this is, I love this image, I think it's a successful image, but when you see my crude video, it's kind of better, just in terms of, the photograph doesn't capture it in its entirety, It's big. And it's all tied to branches and tree trunks. And you can see that I suspended some wires between things to give me more points to tie things to. But about a week after I took this image, it was on the property of some friends of mine, and they let me leave it up. And about a week later, there was like a nor'easter came through, and that rocky creek bed was a roaring stream. And I'm kicking myself to this day for not driving 2 hours up there to photograph it again, because that would have been really cool. This is just crumpled pieces of paper that I shot in near Asheville, North Carolina. And this is the beginning of me sort of trying to exploit wind more. Because up to this point, I really wanted, windless conditions so that you could see the material really well, and I didn't have to struggle photographically. So this was sort of an experiment in sort of getting away from that. This is bendy straws in Deer Isle, Maine. And another one of the challenges with these things is that since the photograph is in 2 dimensions, a lot of times you can't really see where the thing is in space unless there's a shadow. And it wasn't going to cast a shadow on this overcast day, and I always shoot, more or less after the sun has gone down when there'll be no shadow anyway. So I decided in this case to create my own shadow out of, straws. And that was sort of a revelation in terms of, how you read images. Not sure what this is. Okay, so this is Wyoming. This is when I got serious about working with wind. And so like, at this point, I started to think of shooting on at these locations as almost sort of a collaboration between myself and nature, but it can be a collaboration that becomes confrontational because I don't always get what I want. But in this case, I did get what I wanted. And to do this, I had a wire armature in the middle that all these cups were attached to, and then numerous monofilaments shooting off of the armature, tied to rocks and ladders and poles and stuff like that. So that, in the end, the center of that looks really saturated. The center is more or less static, but then the ones in the margins have some movement, which gives it this either explosive or contracting kind of look. This was actually called by some troll on the internet a frat party being sucked into a black hole, which works really well for me. There it is on its way to the location. And this is another one that I shot in Wyoming, and it's plastic shopping bags, the ones that say thank you 10 times on them. So it's called Thank You Bags #1. But it actually took me like 3 days to get the shot because the first 2 days there was no wind. And so it's just these like limp, sagging bags. And someone walked by it one morning and they said it looked like a KKK rally, which was not good. But then on the third day, the wind came and I got my shot. And here's a little video just to give you an idea of how it looked. I think the video is more successful than the image in this case. But again, it's putting these things. I'm really interested in the mutability of objects, and how you can wrest them from their usual established context, put them somewhere new, and see what happens, and see how your mind is sort of forced to reinterpret them. This is a terrible video, but this is California. So in end of 2013, I moved to California, which opened up a whole bunch of problems, but also which led to a whole bunch of new solutions in terms of how I make my work. But this is perhaps how I felt when I moved to California a little bit. Oh, we've all been there. I always do videos of the destruction of the pieces, and that's one of my favorite ones. But this is the piece itself. Cups number 2, I guess. But this is in Novato, in Marin County, and Skywalker Ranch is right over the hill from there. And whenever it rains in California and it's green for like 3 weeks, I try to really get out there and make some work, because the rest of the time it's golden. This is tutus, and again, like to a lot of people, tutus are this expression of joy and childlike enthusiasm. But I don't know, to me, they're sort of represent the Disneyification of childhood. And I had my daughter was obsessed with tutus, and there came a point where I'd had enough of tutus. So there was like some associations for me to play with, and it was almost like, with Post-it notes or tutus, I could exercise my feelings from these things by doing this with them, by making art out of them. This is shot in near Lone Pine, California, where they did all the westerns in the 30s and 40s, and I wanted to experiment with making a picture out of a magazine. And so this is the September issue of Vogue. And I was actually worried that I almost bought 2 copies of the issue because I thought that one might not be enough. But as we all know, like the September issue is a phone book. And I didn't even get like halfway through it because it's still like right down there at the bottom. But again, sort of using the elements and using the wind as best I could. This is my second foray into magazines. And this one is a not very reputable magazine called Lusty Wives. Oops, I wasn't supposed to go there yet. And, you know, I did this because I want it to be one color. And if I want it to all be skin color, then obviously everyone has to be naked. But B, you know, it's about, again, taking things out of context and taking something that you have a strong association with and trying to break that. I kind of expected people to be offended by this, and I was a little bit afraid of that. And I'm a little bit disappointed that so few people were offended by it. And so I think I'm going to have to start trying harder to offend people. But actually, someone who I think might be here said that it also fits in because while, you know, cups or cheese balls are sort of commodities of our sort of industrial manufactured culture, women are also commodities as well, unfortunately. So it sort of it meshes. This is those little tabs that you put on hanging file folders, which again, like for me, like when I first went to New York after college and I was working temp jobs at book publishers, like I became intimate with these things. And like some people probably love them because they feel like they feel when they've done their taxes and all their receipts are hanging perfectly in a file, but for me, they're just pure anxiety. And so that's fun for me to play with that. And here's the final image. And I sort of envisioned them being sort of like fireflies, and that sort of came to fruition somewhat. This is wire. And along the way, I've sort of become interested in other sort of organizational systems aside from, you know, natural organic ones. And so I've started thinking a lot about data and stuff like that. And so I sort of wanted to see what it would be like if I sort of put some data points in there, some letters, just to sort of imply that kind of reference. This is a video of a hula hoops installation that I did in the Sierras. And this one was great because I got to spend 2 days on it because it's on government land, and I found a spot that was like off a road that you couldn't see, and so I gambled that no one would stumble on it and spent 2 days working on it. And then the final image. The hard thing often with these is if the shape starts to look too much like something, because your mind is so good at sort of categorizing things and interpreting them. If it becomes too much like something, then it doesn't work. And other people don't seem to see this, but when I look at this, I see those little bird things that where the beak dunks into a glass of water and goes like that, and I'll just never get out of my mind. And I'll always be a little disappointed in this image because it reminds me of that damn bird. But, you know, it is what it is. This is another hula hoops that I did on the beach in Montara, California, which is about half an hour south of San Francisco. And this one starts to give you an idea of the infrastructure. And the big difficulty the biggest difficulty moving to California was A, the wind, but B, that there are hardly any trees. unless you're, in the redwood forest. So whereas I started out doing these things in the Catskills in upstate New York, where there's bazillion trees that I could just tie stuff to, in California I had to start, building my own trees, more or less. And I'll show you a video that demonstrates that shortly. So this is the hula hoops, number 2. I also manicured the sand because I didn't want there to be too many footprints. This is that safety fence stuff that you see at construction sites. This is a place called Carrizo Plain, which is a Bureau of Land Management piece of land in sort of between San Francisco and LA. And they're known for having super blooms of wildflowers in the springtime. And I kind of got some, I think it's sour grass or something, so it's not the super bloom I was looking for, but it played well with the orange safety fence. And so like, a lot of times what I'm trying to do with these is to have the installation simultaneously in harmony and in conflict with the environment. And I think this one sort of accomplishes that to a degree. I believe this is a video. Oh, this is it's going to come up here, I think. There we go. I kind of wanted to do some more video-based stuff, some sort of kinetic wind machines, and this is my only attempt with cups and spoons. Sort of dealing with the conditions in California, because there's a window of a couple of months early in the year when you have nice calm conditions, but the rest of the time it's just windy as the bejesus. And I think about moving to Southern California because I think it's a lot less windy down there. I think that's why they have observatories down there, because the observatories need calm conditions. This is balloons, and this one I solved the nothing to tie strings to problem by using helium balloons. And so I rented a tank of helium from the party store and bought a bunch of balloons. And basically, I spent about an hour on this installation and 6 hours inflating balloons, which is really like, next time you see one of those clowns on the street, you should have respect for him or her, because it's really difficult. Because you have to attach the string to the side of the balloon and then tie a knot, and the string has to go into the knot, and it takes some serious fine motor skills. And the assistant I had that day did not have the fine motor skills that I required, so I had to do it all myself. So this is the takeout containers. And another issue I've had in California is that, a lot of times the sun sets right in my picture, because in the east I could go to the beach and I'd be facing east and the sun would be behind me. But in California, the sun's right in, messing up my stuff. So I decided to just confront that problem and make a piece that was designed to be a lens, to reflect the sun. And so I got to this location in the morning and I used my astronomy app to figure out exactly where the sun was going to set, 8 hours later, and set up my sculpture accordingly. And I particularly like this material too, because it's about leftovers. It's about excess food consumption, something we discussed a lot last night. But it's funny, when I was making it, someone asked me if it was specifically about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it wasn't to me. But since then, like 3 more people have asked me if this is about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So at this point, I just say yes, if someone asks me that. And I think, but for some reason, this one is specific, is like, people look at it and they're like, this is about, waste and environmental degradation, much more than any of the other ones, for whatever reason. Here's a little video of it blowing around. This is also at that Montara State Beach, which is pretty much my favorite beach. And you know, as much as I love like exploring different locations, the beach is kind of perfect for me because the beach is different every day. It's like a blank canvas, and something special and new happens all the time. Whereas I don't think you can quite say that about, you know, somewhere in the mountains or whatever. You probably could to a degree, but I think it's more extreme at the beach. This is Pescadero, about an hour south of San Francisco. Again, back to these glowy things, which I told you I have misgivings about, but they're so fun to work with. And these are the glow necklaces that little kids wear at birthday parties, or people have them at raves or whatever, you know. Actually, I was making one of these once, and some millennials walked by, and they was like, "Is there a rave here later?" I swear. So this one really shows you how these things are done. So I build these, I set up these heavy-duty stands, and then I stake them down because there'll be a lot of tension with the monofilaments that I tie between these two, basically gigantic volleyball nets that I've made. So here it is. So that's the first fence. Camera. Second fence. This is in Sonoma. I've made friends with the people at the Sonoma Land Trust, and they let me go to their amazing holdings and do images. San Francisco is right there. Can't quite see it. There's the image, looking a little saturated. That's those pit balls that they have at like IKEA in like the kids' room or whatever, or at McDonald's, like a bacteria vector, if there ever was one. That's straws. Ocean Beach in San Francisco. And I was really ticked off that that fisherman was there at the time, but then I was really happy when I saw the image. This is Tutu's number 3, which is in Half Moon Bay, up on a hill overlooking the ocean. And this one was one of my great photography moments, just in terms of the conditions just being perfect and being in the right place at the right time. And here's the final image. Oh, and I just had another video here of the destruction, the bittersweet ending. Yeah. But these speak to the ephemeral quality of these. 3-ring binders. This is in Sonoma, another Sonoma Land Trust property called the Estero Estuary, which is known as one of the windiest places in California, because there's, I don't know why exactly, there's this like notch of land that the wind just whips through all the time. And so I had this idea that I was going to do this piece out of file folders there, and it was really hard. And this is what was going on. So the wind would just rip them down as fast as I would put them up. But I did end up getting an image somehow. And as I told you, I like to manicure the sand. And this is a recent revelation that I had. But this is in Edisto. Oh, oops. Oh, I just blew it. There we go. In Edisto, South Carolina, a few months ago. And this image actually didn't work out to my liking, but those are nylons, AKA pantyhose. which were really fun to work with, really challenging because you wanted there to be a ton of tension on them. And so it was really time consuming and difficult. The image didn't work out for whatever reason, like I didn't light it right or something like that. But I'm looking forward to trying again with those. And again, it's about figuring out what the potential of each material is, not only in terms of what I can make it do, but also how I would imagine it would behave if it was organic and maybe even alive. So this is like sort of the beginning of I'm sort of transitioning into some new work. And it's always a gradual process for me. And with this, instead of thinking about organic systems, I was thinking about the New York subway system. That was my starting point when I did this piece. And it kind of went from there. This is plates. And this will give you an idea of what the wind can do. And I curse a lot during these videos, so if you hear any curse words, I apologize. Especially when stuff like this happens. But so I'm still making these things that have this chaotic energy, but I decided that I wanted to add the constraint of sort of a geometric shape. And so I tried to make it sort of triangular to see what would happen, and I like the result. And here's the image looking a little saturated. Another thing that I've started to get really interested in is artificial intelligence. And I've talked to some people I know in the Bay Area about trying to come up with an algorithm that could essentially design these things for me so that I could sort of outsource myself. And then the algorithm would design the piece, and then I would be the machine that puts it together. And I could, I was talking about having, sliders. So each slider would represent a different type of organization. Like one could be, starlings, one could be shoaling fish, one could be North Korean soldiers. And I could just move them around, and I would tell the algorithm the space and the material and how many and stuff like that. But while thinking about that, I realized that I am the algorithm. And the reason for that is that I basically, I give myself a set of rules to make each of these things, and then I have to conform to those rules as I make them. So I'm not sure where I'll go with that. This is another plates one that I did. And this is actually a surfer video in addition to being an installation video. So watch these guys. Check these guys out right here. Oh yeah, sweet. And then this guy over here, you think he's done, but he's not. You wait. Here he goes. Yes. But again, I wanted to have some sort of, have a more controlled shape, perhaps implying, representations of data or things like that. So I'm still sort of exploring that and a number of other ideas. There's that image. To conclude, the last thing that I've been working on the last year is doing actual installations in gallery spaces. And I'm really excited about that, but at the same time, I'm very aware that to do that, I'll be moving into a space that's much more crowded than the one I'm in right now. Because right now, I have a little niche of my interventions in nature and photographs of that. But in the installation world, there are amazing people like Tara Donovan who do stuff like this with styrofoam cups, or stuff like this with plastic cups. Or there is Monica Gersmala, who does these awesome tape sculptures. Like she's entirely a tape artist. I love that. Or Cornelia Parker, who will dismantle like an entire building and make this really cool installation out of it. But I have done a couple of things, like at a show in Atlanta last summer, I did a piece sort of suspended in the middle of the gallery, which is nice because it sort of gives people an idea of what these things look like in 3 dimensions. You can see some of my prints on the walls there. And I did a piece in Massachusetts over the summer as well, and with file folders, which I really like. I like file folders. And then here's a short video that's actually shot via skateboard. Check it out. It's like a drone. And that's about it. That's my spiel.
Some time for questions and comments. So you mentioned being inspired by animals. Do you ever, or have you ever, either on purpose or by accident, collaborated with animals in your pieces?
Yeah, I see a lot of animals. Like, I saw like a flying squirrel in upstate New York once, and the tutus picture, the first one on the beach, like a pod of whales swam by, like right at the break. Like usually you see whales that are way out, but these were right there, like right where the waves were breaking, and like this says something about me in not a very positive way. But my first thought was, I'm about to witness like one of those beaching events, and it's going to ruin my whole shoot because I'm going to have to try to save the whales. But they didn't. They just like kind of went by. But no like explicit collaborations. No. I should think about that though.
Earlier when you were mentioning that you like video because you can capture sort of more dimensionality to your pieces, especially the pieces that maybe read as being more flat and then it turns out they're really extended.
Yeah.
Have you thought of sort of using like bullet time, where this would take a lot of equipment, but essentially setting up numerous cameras so that they're all taking a photo at the exact same time, and then you can string that together into a video?
Maybe. I mean, I guess part of the problem for me is that I'm not really a gearhead.
Right.
Like I have like a 4x5 film camera that I bought like 15 years ago, and like I have a Canon digital camera, but like I don't get excited about the tech side of things, and I should, and I keep wanting to like hire like a drone operator or something, and also I think about taking multiple pictures from multiple angles, but at the same time I really like to keep things lean, and that would require a lot more people and a lot more planning, and I might get in over my head to the point where I don't actually get the picture, you know. So that's kind of the fear that I'm always dealing with. Sure.
Another two-part question. I know you mentioned that the one with the plastic to-go containers, how it's not supposed to relate to the environment, but everyone has urban stuff like that. Have you ever considered trying to directly make connections with nature and like environmental impacts?
Well, no, I do. I mean, I didn't mean it was specifically about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, but I'm certainly thinking about the environment, and I'm trying to draw attention to like the chasm between us and nature, the perhaps growing chasm, and by showing these types of materials that are so cheap and mass-produced and kind of gaudy and vulgar, I'm you know, pulling a guilt trip a little bit in a way.
And then second part to that, have you ever considered leaving these things up for a couple days?
I would love to.
Like,
I'd love to, but I usually build them at state beaches or you know, private land, and people generally don't want that because they'll start to fall apart, and then it'll essentially be an elaborate littering project. But I have done it a few times, like the hoses one and the plates one. Those were on the property of some friends, and they loved them, and they left them. And in fact, the hoses one, those expensive hoses, like survived like a upstate New York winter quite well. And so yes, I'd love to be doing that. And like, you know, in addition to doing stuff like this, I really want to find an institution or something that will let me build something in nature, like where you could walk into the woods and see this mysterious apparition, and see it at all different times of day, like go and see it with flashlights at night or something, which I think would be really cool. No, sure.
Do you invest your money in party supply stores or office stores?
I did, you know,
What do you do with the stuff?
I wrote to Office Depot once, and I was like, look what I'm doing with your shit. But they didn't write me back. Yeah. Do you want me to do one for your corporate lobby? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, there is the problem of recycling it all, though. And it's easy to recycle, you know, folders, but when they're attached to fishing line in a bazillion places, I sort of face a choice. Where do I like spend 2 hours like separating all this stuff, or do I do something else? And now I feel like I have to spend 2 hours separating all this because I just outed myself. So, you know.
Can you explain a little more your thought process behind location scouting? Do you find material you really like to work with, and you maybe associate that with a certain landscape or area that you like, or is it kind of one happens at one point?
Yeah, it depends, because the locations is like one of the hardest parts of this whole thing. Because I mean, I guess I'm kind of a scaredy cat. Like I probably could do a lot more just rogue installation making and just try to get away with it, like in state parks or government land or whatever. But I have this fear of like spending 6 hours on something and having somebody come along and tell me to get the hell out of there. So I spend a lot of time looking for locations where I can shoot. And so oftentimes that's what comes first. And so I'll find a location, and then I'll think about what material I want to see there. But it could also just be that I have a location and I'm really interested in a particular material, and I'll just figure out how to make them work together. But you know, at the beach, like I've realized that translucent stuff really works well in that very bright sky-dominated environment. Whereas in the woods or against a green hill, something that's solid will probably work better. So there's a lot of things I've learned way more slowly than I should have learned them. Like the monofilaments I use, this is like my biggest trade secret. But when you're against the sky, the fishing line works really well because the light just goes right through it. But fishing line against a landscape just sticks right out. Whereas when you're shooting against a landscape, black thread. Because like the camera literally can't see it against, especially if it's a detailed environment like leaves or grass or something like that. It just doesn't even show up. So.
What's your process like on, I was curious about the landscape, which she was asking about, but like artistically, aside from the construction of it, do you like beforehand kind of think about it and draw it out, or is it really organic when you're on the site figuring it out as you go?
Well, I mean, I try to think it out sometimes, and I make drawings and stuff, but then I'll just make some rash decisions that change everything. But I think what I've settled on is what I was saying at the end there, that I just set up some rules for myself, that I can some constraints that I can work within, as opposed to trying to have a really specific plan. Because you know, if I have a specific plan, I might change it because I'm capricious, but it also might change because of the natural conditions, the wind or or whatever, or rain or something like that. So
What do you think you might do next with, like, your art?
I don't know. I mean, I really like making these floating sculptures, and I think I'll probably keep doing that. But I do want things. I do want to change. I'm kind of like less interested in these amorphous shapes that are, you know, breaking up and coming together at the same time. And I guess that's why I'm sort of now gravitating towards these more geometric shapes. But it's just happening gradually, I guess. I try not to push it too hard.
Can you speak a little bit about the difference between making your installation in nature and versus in the gallery?
I meant to say something about that because, you know, these are fun and I like doing them, but I feel like the tension that I achieve with the in nature photographs is not replicated here, and that's something I'm thinking really hard about. And the two things I'm thinking about are I could just flip the whole concept and make a sculpture out of sticks and leaves or something in a gallery, or I could do both. I could do a manufactured stuff installation and then bring nature in as well. Like I could have somebody dump some sand on the floor or something like that, or rocks or leaves or something like that. I don't know, but I'm thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, so I mean, going off that, it makes sense. The video component, like if you wanted to take it out of the gallery, like how essential that would be for these more sculptural things, for people to experience them. So how do you feel about outsourcing that? You talked about like exploring drones or drone technologies. Like, do you feel like as an artist that's something you really have to retain is the videography of it, or are you comfortable outsourcing kind of that?
Oh no, I'm happy to outsource that. And in fact, some of these are outsourced because, you know, some of the people I work with are, you know, have their own video equipment, and they'll bring that. Like the surfer video, that wasn't my camera. That was this guy I was working with camera, and it's a nicer camera than mine. So yeah, I'm pretty much happy with. And as I told you, I want to outsource everything to the robot computer if I can, but I just want to be the one who makes the rules. You know, I don't have to be as hands-on. But, and you know, I also think about just the physical demands of this, and you know, I'm not that old, but like there'll be a point where, you know, I have to do more outsourcing. So I'll think about that in the future.
Do you still have the robot?
I do. He's in a box he's like in a fetal position, like a ancient burial site, in a box in Sausalito, in a storage locker. And I have this fantasy of like one day somebody's going to ask me to do a robot exhibition, and the plan, what I want to do is I want to have him like laying in state in the middle of the room, but I want to like make him into a terrarium, like have him like all covered in like moss and sticks, and maybe there'd be some bugs in there or something like that, like this sort of state of decay. But someday that could happen. Anyone else?
Thank you, Thomas, so much.
Thank you.